This is Dave Monk, your Prairie Monk, WAFT Champaign 90.1 on your FM dial.
I'm Bill Saylor, working the board today. This is your weekly, Dave's weekly discussion of things environmental or related to local natural history or cultural history, or what you did this week.
Well,
usually
the clock has changed.
Yeah.
I'm very disappointed in that event. It's a human-regulated thing, and it affects your biorhythm, and I think I'm very glad that there are some states that have opted out, and there are thousands of requests on the internet to stop this change of time every year.
Yeah, this weekend is the, it's November 3rd,
Yes.
2019, and this weekend was the clocks fall back to standard time. And there was a point where there was serious talk about getting rid of the daylight savings time. Instead, President George W. Bush signed to expand it.
Yes, well, I hope it disappears. The Rattlesnake Master Run is running its 22nd Rattlesnake Master Run for the Prairie right now. And get a chance, go and view it. It will be, some will run very quickly, some will be doing 10K, some will do 5K, some will do a walk. And Grand Prairie Friends is running that, and they use it as a promo, but it also brings in some funds for them too. I want to say in passing, there are some people who have passed on. We try to say something about them because this is a time when their families come together and people come together, and that will never happen again. So, Bill, can you say something about Kenny Holmes?
Yes, yesterday I went to the memorial service for Kenny Holmes. If you are a fan of the Prairie Dogs, you've probably heard him referred to as Kenny or Pappy. Oddly enough, because he had a long, distinguished academic career as well. But a lot of people in this community know him as a banjo player in the Prairie Dogs and many other circumstances later in his life. And he taught banjo at the Community Center for the Arts also, and until he couldn't after he was less well in his later years. The memorial service was in Urbana yesterday. A few weeks. He passed on September 5th, so a few weeks for the family to gather and plan and invite people. And so that was yesterday. And he was from Michigan originally. Ken Holmes had a Bachelor of Science degree in electrical engineering, earned in 1959. Probably a surprise to many. And then a master's in anatomy in 1966 and a PhD in physiology in 1972 from Michigan State. So he'd been at Michigan State, he'd been at Southern Illinois also. It says Alton. I was going to say Edwardsville, Alton. And then he was here in the College of Veterinary Medicine at the University of Illinois for a long time. And part of that time he served as assistant head of veterinary biosciences, an interim head, and retired in 2001. And it was interesting that there wasn't, we thought maybe there'd be more peers or friends from that context of his life at the memorial service, but there wasn't so much. And it might be that that's long enough now that a lot of folks just simply aren't around anymore from that time. But we know from the Prairie Dogs, I want to play this little clip, if I press the buttons right, courtesy of Mike Zerba's collection, actually, some time ago. Let's hear a little bit of Ken Holmes when he stopped in the West Studios back in 2003.
Oh, goodness, thank you very much. My buddy here, Doug, isn't it, right?
Yep.
Doug's going to work on the pro ambulance crew out there. Dropped by the studio to say hey to the old timer. And the old man from the mountains standing back of me looking in the door. Father Holmes. Hi, Father Holmes.
How you doing, Cat?
Father Holmes is one of the finest five-string banjo players and plays with the Prairie Dogs, who'll be here in about 15 minutes. And we're gonna do our favorite song that
The favorite one.
we always do, and give Kenny
We
a
just gotta
chance.
figure out which one is the favorite.
Favorite,
There's
yeah,
got
they're
about
right.
5 of them.
Yeah, Bob.
We
Yeah,
just have
that's
to figure out
right.
Which one of those 5? This is
But,
the real favorite.
Glad to have you guys
well,
come
we
in.
hope we can help entertain your audience a little bit.
Oh, I think you probably will. And Doug, I'm glad you came by the studio. I would like to remind you too, sir, to put more water in your soup, milk in your gravy. Don't forget the syrup on your pancakes. Kenny Holmes
That's
puts
right.
a lot of syrup on his
Oh,
pancakes.
too many.
That's right.
Too much syrup.
Too much syrup. Yeah, that's right. And you're looking good, though.
Well, thank you.
You're looking good
Thank you very
for an old fella. You're.
I know.
And everything like that.
Yeah.
Father Holmes on the banjo.
Well, I've lost every light to be happy. When I lost that good love that I found, she warned me she'd leave and she left me before my first tear hit the ground. And she's gone, 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 gone. Crying won't bring her back. Harder to cry the faster that train flies, farther on down the track.
So there was a recording from the Old Timers Country Music, Old Time Country Music Jamboree back in 2003 at the Prairie Dogs, of which, again, Ken Holmes was the banjo player in most of the formations,
And
if
an
not
academic,
all the
too.
versions of the Prairie Dogs. Dropped in frequently, whether it was the Old Timers birthday party we would have here or pledge drive fundraisers, or just drop in. I think that time, I may have a picture of that visit. They just kind of crammed in the studio and did what they do, which is a great thing about
Yes.
bluegrass musicians. So music was featured actually in the service yesterday for Kenny Holmes, who again passed away in September at the age of 81. He'll be missed.
Well, I would like to add Ralph Alexander passed, and he was a mathematician. Got an engineering degree in Purdue and also a PhD in Purdue, and was involved with geometry. And there was a gang of U of I math professors that were also very interested in environment and interested in enjoying each other's company, philosophizing or partying. And Ralph was part of that. He was from Alabama in the first place. And these are the people that help us keep afloat in terms of doing environmental things. So we will miss Ralph a lot. He was a fun person to be with, and also an academic. And in his retirement, he did a lot of photography, especially of patterns that he saw in leaves and trees and things like that. Sympathy to Stephanie, who is his wife. They lived on the Sangamon River, just south of Mahomet, and a very interesting little place. And those sort of river areas are being preserved by the Land Conservation Group, which is acquiring land along the Sangamon so that some of those environments that Ralph and Stephanie enjoyed will continue. Next thing I want to say something about is a court injunction in Paxton Friday afternoon. It It's gotten to the record already, and the question was preservation of a iconic Royer-designed high school, which this school district would like to demolish. And so there's been a vote to provide money for a new expansion of a Peterson school that is now a two-story school, but it obsoleted the Royer High School. But the building is an iconic piece. It has been recorded in book form with Brian Adams, who has a lot of respect for the fact that if you came to Urbana in 1920s, you would encounter a lot of Royer buildings. Weft, actually, at the end of the street, has a Royer building that used to be the Illinois Power office space, but it's also where interurbans and various levels of trams would have a base. Well, the demolition was put on a vote along with the multi-million-dollar fundraiser for this school, and that's been completed. But the citizens of Paxton have had quite a few citizens, signatories up to 500 in a small community, which is quite impressive. And in an attempt to save the icon, it has something to do with tourism. It could be functionally used. It's a very strong school. It would last for another 100 years. Another Royer building is the city building, and it is still in action. It's intriguing the amount of brickwork that is on it. So we've had on the program Anya Manetz, and she has been leading the push to preserve the building, and there's been various gimmicks associated with. Firstly, the area to be demolished was more than an acre, and within the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency and historic places, if you have more than an acre, you have to establish rules of the game to ensure that your demolition materials don't float elsewhere. And so in order to avoid that, the school district pulled the area down to 0.99% of an acre, which was left them so that they didn't have to go through that state process. The building rates for a national level historic building. The next thing that happened was that there was a sale, and a lot of the interior was gutted at that time. The building was still a substantial building. Then asbestos was removed at the price of something like over $1 million. And the date for demolition was at the 18th, and that was quickly moved back to the 4th. So the building is due for demolition on Monday. So Anya and her father, who's an attorney, took out a court injunction to allow the community to consider the possible purchase or preservation of that building. It went before the judge on 3:30 on Friday afternoon, and the judge was in favor of the demolition of the building. That's a little sad because we've been talking about a corridor between Kankakee and Gilman and Onaga and Buckley and Loader and Paxton and Ludlow and Rantoul as an eco and socio-tourism opportunity. Take people off of 57 and put them on 45, which is a relatively slow-moving old highway, since most of the traffic is on 57, a rather new highway, and the realization is that there's these little towns that are more or less parallel to 57. So Paxton is in the process of putting up a 125-foot high flag pole with a 20-foot flag on it to attract tourists in from 57. Well, if you're going to do that, you need to have various icons that are attractive and storylines, and we've been talking about that. And Paxton has a reasonably intact town with a water tower. It's lost a theater. It's lost some of its iconography, but it's still an interesting town. Its pharmacy is not run by Walgreens. It's run by local citizens. Its restaurants the same way. Not they're unique in the sense that they're local. The town is on top of the Paxton Moraine, which is the highest hill between southern Illinois and northern Illinois. There's a cut through it so that trains no longer have to be pushed over the hill with the aid of a engine waiting to push freight trains over. So there's character there. There's still going to be character if we lose the building. But the building is sort of in the center between Kankakee and Champaign, and could be a visitor center. It could be a lot of different things other than an educational institution. But it requires a lot of get up and go in the community to save such a building. And there was a plebiscite taken of people who would want the building down, which was like 300 people, and people who want to preserve it, and it was 100 people. Part of it has to do with the history of preservation in and around the community. We look at that and hope that the small cadre of people who are for preservation realize the value of that sort of building and the site, which is on 45 or almost on 45. So Minetz is going to appeal, but the demolition is date has been pushed forward, because if you demolish a building, then there's no problem. The sooner you get rid of it, the less you're going to be having a debate about whether it should be preserved. So that is in the record. It's on the front page of the record, which is the Ford County newspaper. And so there's been very good attempts, and so even if we lose or they lose. It reminds people that they do have ancestry, which is Scandinavian. They do have people who care about the region when it was a glacier and making a moraine, and Indians were there with artifacts, the arrowheads and scrapers and things where they would probably come to Paxton but move back towards places like Vermilion County for protection in winter, but leave a stock of various era artifacts that archaeologists do enjoy working with. It's linearly, it is part of a continental glaciation, and so you have the outwash plain creeks that come off. So if you run along the top of the moraine, it's rolling, and it has little dips for water to run off to the south and to the north. It has small communities that came with the input of the Illinois Central Railroad. Ludlow was the last one of the terminals of the Illinois Central Railroad at one time. And there are sad stories about people getting out there and not really knowing where to go in the prairie because there was no trails, no place to know. You could get lost at Ludlow. So we'll be interested to see what happens with the appeal, but it may be post-demolition.
Y'all are listening to the Prairie Monk program on WEFT Champaign, 90.1 FM, your community radio station in East Central Illinois. We stream live on WEFT.org, and the Prairie Monk programs are video recorded and broadcast on Urbana Public Access Television.
Twice a week.
And then posted on YouTube, where you can search YouTube for The Prairie Monk.
And then we do get links so that we can send information to people who would like to be there. We have now something like 200 one-hour programs there that are videotaped. The video allows us to put in graphs and charts and pictures, and sometimes a picture is worth 1,000 words, so that augments the radio program. The radio program goes out as it is now, and the TV program usually picks up a different population of people, and once again the YouTube rendering gets a different population of people again. We're also starting to do blogs which are more one unit. Like today, you'll see us dealing with a range of different things. Other times, we try to make a one-topic statement and have probably a visitor to come and discuss that. We've done that several times recently. I went to the farmer's market. I'm always intrigued to go to the farmer's market. There are people I talk to. I enjoy their company. And they buy fruit and vegetables, and it's fresh, and it's indoor now. And on Saturday, Patch Adams was there, and Patch Adams dresses up like a clown. He's a medical person, and he uses clowning to introduce people, to share thoughts, and he was active along with Susan Parenti and the Students for Design of Society, which is a group that is quite concerned about climate at the moment. And climate is the theme that they were looking at. There's Miriam Larson was there, and Miriam has been a school teacher. She's been a librarian, and she's taken herself off with a sabbatical of her own making to look at climate. And so we talked for quite some time, and one of the things that they're thinking is that people just don't know their environment. So do we have seed picking events or things where people can do things? That's important. The Grand Prairie Friends has been having up to 150 or 125, I think, volunteers at one time helping to plant trees, and they get a feeling for doing. So there's a question there about how you might involve people so that they actually realize that there is an environment and that it is endangered, and to a large extent it might extinct not only a lot of biological species but humans too. So touchy-feely things are helpful, but I have to admire that, but at the same time I have to say that behind that you need legal action, you need people who are educated in environment in order to protect it. But tomorrow, Ron Sleater will arrive, and we'll go pick seed. And if volunteers would like to come, they can get hold of me at 840-1911. 840-1911. Often we're looking for plants that are a little different, that we haven't got seed for. I keep running into people at Aldi's. I met Morris Melly, who owns some swampland at St. Joe. And at St. Joe, you have the Salt Fork running through St. Joe in a big meander, which was cut off. It was channelized. So there is bottomlands there that were not good for agriculture because it was too wet. It was a little bit like you would expect to see if you were here in 1830 and came to Flatville. So the Soil and Water Conservation people and other agencies have gotten together, and they've planted native trees on that those swamplands. And this gentleman has swamplands a little further north than 74. So we had quite a discussion about that. He also has a shop on University Avenue, very near to Smith Road, and he does T-shirts there. And we had a discussion about how you get your people from the Kickapoo Trail through to Champaign without them getting killed on that road. And so we talked about taking the Forest Preserve land that's owned by the Forest Preserve to Dobson Drive. And then there's a little piece of Norfolk Southern Railroad that's left over when you close out a railroad line. You leave a mile so that you can back up a train and shunt into different places. Well, Smith Road went through part of that and left a little spur there that was about 400 yards long, and that could be reenacted as a trail so that you could continue the Kickapoo Trail. Instead of having to go onto Main Street, which is narrow and dangerous, you could go on to the railroad, continue through, and if you wanted to go to Urbana, you'd take the Smith Road and go on Main Street. If you want to go to Champaign, you take a corridor to the north side of the railroad yards. Now this takes a lot of administrative skill, and that's not something that happens easily if you're on railroad territory. But the railroad territory connects with MTD buildings that used to be the old roundhouse for engines. And then you get across University Avenue at a location where you could have a bridge over, and it's not as well trafficked as further closer to Champaign. So then you go through the sewer treatment plant, across the boneyard, and up to Kerr, and take Kerr west to Broadway, and then north, and go around Busey Woods, and find your way across to Washington and to Champaign on back roads. There are other ways of doing it, but we discussed that some. And so it's interesting that as you wander around, you get to share some of these things with different people. I have to say that the Kickapoo people will have a promo on the 15th of November. It's at Sleepy Creek Vineyard, just south of Oakwood, and that is encouraging the next section of the Kickapoo Trail to be put into action. The first 7 miles to St. Joe is very actively used. People appreciate it. They enjoy it. It's extra wide, so we don't have much prairie left, but it's enjoyed by ADA, the American Disabilities Association people, and they able to use wheelchairs with batteries, and even now they're asking if they could have a battery charger on this corridor. A very expensive thought, but it just might happen. Then there's a gap between St. Joe. There's a little piece through the town of St. Joe, which was finished this summer. But on the east side of St. Joe, there's some very good prairie that's been heavily mown, but could come back with a little bit of sympathy from people who understand what their heritage prairie is. We're not sure that's going to happen, but from east of the subdevelopments that are east of St. Joe, looking towards Oakwood, there's about 7 miles or more of potential rail trail, which won't be built immediately. And we would like to have that as a narrower trail. And it means we'd have to do battle with people who you have an emphasis on recreation rather than preservation. But when we're down to the state having preserved 0.01% of the local ecosystem, which was like 2/3 of the state, that's not very much. And this is not the world's greatest prairie, but it's all we have. And so I'm gunning for a narrower trail between St. Joe and Oakwood. At Oakwood, just this summer, the trail has been developed. It is sort of wiggly-woggly a little bit so that it goes through the village and maintains a mown area and has some character. And then the next piece to be done will be the big bridge over the Vermilion. It's like 100 feet off the ground. It's a quarter-mile long. It's going to be about $3 million to work on that bridge. What will happen is that segments about 30 feet long of prefabricated trail will be brought and put in with a crane. A few of the bridge ties will be taken out so that a pedestal can be welded to I-beams underneath. So you have a safe passageway through. So you won't be building it on the bridge. You'll come in with prefabricated pieces, and there will be sidings that children can't put their heads through, or people can't fall off the bridge. And if it's high enough that if you do that, you die. So that will probably cost about $3 million. It was slated to happen a few years ago, but it hasn't happened yet. But that is likely to be the next development. So the meeting at the Sleepy Creek vineyard site south of Oakwood will be to help these sort of things. Sometimes you get the formal things. The overall trail has generated $12 million to save the corridor as a potential railroad if it's ever needed. The interim trail use will be for bikers and hikers, and that's what's happening.
So that's a Kickapoo Rail Trail event at Sleepy Creek Vineyard, south of Oakwood, November 15th, which you have listed as a Friday. So I assume it's in the evening at some point?
Yes, it's 7 o'clock.
Okay.
The Grand Prairie Friends has its annual meeting at about the same day before, Saturday afternoon. On the 16th will be annual meeting at the Barnhart Farm. Barnharts have a Donald Barnhart especially was interested in perhaps 400 acres of prairie there. They've got about 100, and the university has bought those farms, but the prairie will remain. And Soil and Water and other agencies have got involved. So early on, when Route 45 was expanding, we took vegetation from what was going to be a highway, and Donald took quite a bit of that to plots on the farm. The parents are both from farming communities, and they're also academics, and so Harry adapted his equipment to helping to establish a set-aside that was prairie. The family has a very big barn there, and they've gone through Zoning Board of Appeals and have successfully established a restaurant, which eventually will take up to 300 cars. And it's on the slope of the Yankee Ridge Moraine, so you can see over Savoy, you can see over the Ombre or in the upper reaches of the Ombre. And so it's a very nice place to be, and if you don't know about it, just go down Vine Street till you meet a dead end, and you'll be on Church Street, and there's a parking lot, and you can walk around a more modern piece of prairie, which is not as what shall I say, biodiverse as the original acre and a half that was put in. The seed came from Doug Wade and Dot Wade in Oregon, Illinois, where they were collecting biodiverse seed, and so there's little 1.5 acres, which is circular and cherished as a fairly good example of original prairie. The more recent plantings have been a little more like rough and tough, but they have a good range of biodiversity, and you have to give it 5 or 10 years, and it'll be a nice little place to visit. And going back to 45, we this week had some apologies from Department of Transportation because they did mow some of the territory, which we hope doesn't get mown. We hope that it does get burned, however. Burning stimulates the growth of the prairie, and it's in a very visible site between Windsor Road and Curtis Road, and people have to wonder at the vegetation that is there on the east side. So we cherish that a lot and watch it and remember that some of that material went to the Barnhart family.
So the Barnharts will be hosts of the Grand Prairie Friends annual meeting,
Yes.
the facility, Saturday, November 16th, 2 to 5 p.m.
Yep.
Y'all are tuned to the Prairie Monk program on WEFT Champaign, 90.1 FM. I have another, I don't know if you're about to shift topics. I'm looking at your itinerary. I have another announcement if you are willing to.
Okay, yes.
Event announcement. So those two that Dave just announced were in 2 weeks. My name is Bill Saylor. I'm sitting in for Dave Wazzani during the show today. There's a lot of musical and art events and displays this time of the semester, and particularly at the University of Illinois. One of them is on Saturday, November 9th in the afternoon, 2 p.m. It's the Kuroshio Quartet. This is a project of Jason Finkelman, who does a Sunday evening show here of experimental music. And Jason's getting an ACE Award this week.
Oh, yes, a nice
for
word on Friday night.
being a mover and shaker, as you might
Yes.
say. Or,
That's-
advocate of many artistic things, especially if they are cross-discipline or integrative.
Yes.
And this is a project like that. He's brought together what he calls a Pan-Asian quartet of improvising musicians. And I saw their first outing about 6 months ago. It was back in May. And they had some visuals with it. And, I mean, I like that kind of musical adventure in the first place, but it was quite impressive. And so with another quartet with a few personnel changes and another visual artist, they will be playing Cranard Art Museum in the lower level. Again, 2 p.m. Saturday, November 9th. And it has something of a theme having to do with the legacy of our nuclear experience, and that of Japan as well. The visual artist will be Michael Corner, presenting visuals with chemistry. But the theme underlying this performance is the legacy of nuclear weapons and the family history of the participants and reflections on that. Somewhat similarly, there is an exhibit at Cranard Art Museum at this time reflecting on radioactivity in the landscape. What is the fate of our nuclear waste? Where does it go? What communities?
Good question.
Has it been through and ends up at? That is going on more generally at Cranard Art Museum at this time. But again, there'll be a music and visual performance Saturday, November 9th, 2 p.m., project of Jason Finkelman and his new Kuroshio Quartet.
About the same time, Tuesday, the 12th, the Sousa people will be presenting at the Campbell. It's the Alumni Association on Lincoln, and from 5:30 to 7:30, we'll be talking about the history of school bands, and they're a big deal in across the U.S., and a lot of that had to do with the original work of John Philip Sousa.
I believe they might have been seeking registration to attend that event. So
Yes,
so look it up if that's of interest. School bands, that's a big deal. If you've never lived a portion
you've
of it.
probably been a part of it.
I haven't, no, but I've had plenty of friends and
Yes,
high school friends have done that for a career, actually.
I got a package of information from my sister in Australia, and it's about a rail trail that's about 70 miles long, and it was a major line going up Mount Kosciuszko which is our highest mountain on a chain of plate tectonics going up the east of Australia. And it's a place where this railroad line was delivering to SMHEA. I can say it because I was nearly going to be employed there. It's a Snowy Mountain hydroelectric system where they take rapidly flowing rivers that flow out to the Pacific and channel them through the mountains, and at each place they will drop the water and so produce hydroelectricity. And then that water ends up in a Hume weir, which is positively huge. You could put ferries on it, and it provides irrigation water for the rivers that run west through drier areas. And very famous brothers, Cheney brothers, came from the U.S. where they'd got to desert-type communities and said, we can do something with irrigation here, and they'd done it very well. And then they got asked to come to Australia and do that too, and they did very well. And so there is now irrigation all the way along mainly in this case, the Murray River. And it goes out towards Adelaide. And just the same way as we have problems with the Colorado River, by the time it gets to the Gulf of California there, it's almost non-existent because people tend to take water out of the river. They also take the water out of aquifers, and water rights are very hard to deal with. They're sometimes as loose as a goose, and you don't exactly know how to legislate for better use of the water. But it's so in Australia, it's so in the U.S. But this little line that took equipment up to create dams on the Snowy Mountain, it's about 7,000 feet. It's not a huge mountain. Australia doesn't have huge mountains. But it was retired probably about in the late 70s. And it has been sitting, volunteers have gotten together and they've spent something like 4,000 hours of volunteer time putting together trestles. I don't know whether this is probably big enough to show on camera, but this is a trestle that has been resurrected, and there are about 20 such trestles over little creeks and rivers, and it goes up into high country. So some of the end point of this railroad is the highest railroad bridges in Victoria, which is the state where this trail is. At the end of this, we're hoping, or the Australians are hoping, that you can go through as the equipment is delivered to dams and structures on the mountains. It's sort of like Australia's seventh wonder of the world, and we're hoping that that trail will continue up onto Mount Kosciuszko so that you get an idea of the extent of this man-made situation, which is also using the power of water to generate electricity. Secretly, I'm hoping that some people from here might just take a vacation to this sort of situation and see how other countries do their rail trails, and to involve that Snowy Mountain situation. It is in the throes of climate change. There's been drought for a long time. There have been fires. There's one town that's lost out completely. People couldn't even get in their pickup trucks and get out of it. So there's one town that almost lost out completely. But it goes over environment. One of our problems here is that when you make a very wide trail and it's narrow and there's a highway adjacent, you don't have much of the vegetation left. Well, in this case, the vegetation is right close. And you have to imagine a huffing and puffing steam engine taking freight up the hill. And for hikers and bikers, it's the same situation. It's a challenge, but I am tempted to figure out a time when they would have some opening that would be interesting, that we might be able to take a team of perhaps 10 people to such a situation so that they can enjoy something that's different. I noticed that the construction on the side of bridges is much more austere than what is happening in the U.S. There's a barricade, but you could easily drop off of it. They've had to put in pylons and deal with white ants or termites that get involved in wooden bridges. And they've had to put concrete around some of these stanchions. And
Is there earthquake threat in that area? Are there
no, the
seismic
plate tectonics
hazard?
means that when a plate is moving over another, there is tectonic movements that allow for some earthquakes. Yes.
I just wondered if maybe the construction had to deal with seismic hazard, or is it more just a
we don't have
philosophical matter?
But it's been there in the past, and every so often where there's a volcano, the Australian soils that have been uplifted out of an ocean are very poor, and so the vegetation is very gnarled, and all of a sudden you can come to a volcano where rich material has come up from the internal part of the earth, and the soil is rich. So all of a sudden you'll have a tropical rainforest in the middle of nowhere, and that's an indication. Yes, there has been volcanic movement in the past. So it's a good question, and that sort of thing is what is of interest to some people, and so I started to get a hold of hotels and motels. So
you're going to tour the trail.
Yeah, it's been done in stages, and so they're very proud of themselves. And this was a good thing that my sister had sent. There's also some structures like sidings with sheds and things like that that add to the history. And there's also the backup of the Hume Reservoir, which is nearby. So my sister's husband's family were on the edge of the Hume Reservoir as it filled up. Some of their farmland was being taken over, and the local town had to be moved to a new location because it would be flooded by the dam. And it is positively huge, and it's probably almost as big as Sydney Harbour, which is quite a substantial harbour. Let me see how much time we have. Oh, we've just got 3 minutes, so we don't have a lot of time. Let me see if we've gotten everything that I was after here. I think we've got to the things that might happen. If you're interested in taking a trip to Australia, to paddle around in a rail trail and in a Snowy Mountain hydroelectric system. You might go in wintertime because Australian winters are not too bad. Australian summers are pretty hot. So there's some sort of financial opportunity to go in the off season, and I think it's fun for people who are local to think about going to a different site and seeing how other people do things, and sometimes without a great deal of money, but a lot of acumen. There's one woman who was city bound and a bank teller, and she decided that she was going to go to a small community on this line. So she arrived at a small community there on this little bug that brought passengers to the town, and then she has been one of the workers that has been very much involved with this corridor.
Oh, maybe we can post a link. Like I said, we find our Prairie Monk programs up on YouTube within a week or two. I think with that we should wrap up.
Yes, this is Dave Monk of Prairie Monk, WEFT Champaign, and thank you, Bill, for filling in today.
Oh, my pleasure.
David Witzorny.
Good to sit in.
And he probably will be listening.
Taking a break with his extra hour.
He has done this for 5 years. And
More than
he
that.
deserves a break every
More
once
than
in a
that.
while.
It's like 8 now.
So,
Yeah, thanks to Dave Witzorny for helping it go every
Yes.
week.
and Bill before that, so we really appreciate the teamwork here.